Hello and welcome to the Mitti Podcast.
We are a small but dedicated group with a vision for agroecology and the culture
Around agriculture.
My name is Anurag.
And my name is Lotus.
In this episode, we talk about ourselves, the Mitti Podcast and the Mitti blog, why we are here and what we intend to do.
So how about we start with what the word Mitti means?
That's an interesting question. The word Mitti actually came to us as a collaborative idea of some sorts when we were discussing one day what to name our project, because we wanted to start somewhere. When the idea just came from how do we introduce ourselves to people we might be interested in and who can collaborate, help, or even share their experiences with us. So,
and I think also the meaning of the word, the meaning behind the Sanskrit word really clicked with us and really clicked with what we intended to do and what we stood for.
Yeah, it's a very, very earthy word because, whenever I think about agriculture coming from a country like India, it feels like the word mitti resonates with me a lot.
So it's soil, right?
It is soil. The word means soil. So, and everything that we are doing is somehow
soil connected.
Soil connected, yes. So that's the whole idea behind the word mitti. And since we are a group of people who have nothing to do with agriculture, did not study, didn't come from that background, but yet have this vision to do something about it, we came together. So we thought we would name it a collective. So that's how the word Mitti Collective came into picture.
The Mitti Collective, TMC.
TMC. I think there is something already that's called TMC, but I can't remember.
Oh, no copyright infringement here. We are just the Mitti Collective.
Yes.
But adding to that thought, actually, I think maybe coming from an urban background doesn't really introduce us to how people in the rural areas connect to the soil, connect to the land. Although this has been depicted in so many fiction works, so many artwork, it just clicks to me. It comes to me just instantly to think about a novel I read in my teenage years called The Good Earth. It was a translation from a Chinese novel talking about this specific concept of farmers and their relation to their soil, their land. So I think this is a good introduction to introduce what our vision is.
Exactly. The vision that we had when we started this was to help farmers realign with the soil. Somewhere I think farmers have fallen into this socio-economic crisis in the past few decades because of policy changes, or I don't know. There are so many different changes that have cropped up as far as agriculture is concerned. And in the past few decades, in a developing country like India, you read this news regularly of the grim reality of farmers committing suicides. And it's not really appealing to hear something like this. So, and then I thought, how can I help these people? How can I align my interests with this kind of support? I noticed a few years back through some social media pages that a lot of expats who had traveled abroad were coming back to India and doing something similar to what I was thinking about. They were already on the field, helping farmers through various profit channels and creating alternate practices that help them realign themselves. And this kind of made me think maybe I can try something like this. although it would be 4 more years before I do anything about it.
True. But it's really interesting also to learn through our blog and through writing articles. I was personally shocked to know about the agrarian side of the Indian society and how farmers are more or less the backbone of the country, despite not being so represented or socially taken care of, so to say, protected, And this was one of the factors that led to the deteriorating life quality they had and even committing suicides at times, as you said. Maybe we can now discover more about what we want to do in this regard, given the fact that we are almost all engineers and we don't really have background in farming or agriculture, yet we have the passion to dig behind it and to know more about agroecology, different alternative agriculture practices and the sustainability and the sustainable aspects behind it. How did you get into this, Anurag? Because I think you are amongst us, you are the most read, most well-informed of us in the Mitti Collective.
No, I don't really think that that's the case, but I mean, this is a humble brag, but I have been reading a lot since past few years. And honestly, it would be very unmodest of me to think that this is a problem only in India. I realize that this is a larger problem.
Mm-hmm.
And as we discussed in our blogs as well, it started somewhere in the 1960s where this kind of industrial agriculture took over the traditional agriculture practices, where there was the after effect of such a imposition was that there was a distancing between the soil and the farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And this made me think that, even when I was, as a child, I realized that there is a supply chain behind food. And my grandparents were wise enough to explain or make me realize that this was the case.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere my siblings are far from understanding it, but I do understand it. And it's a larger problem than what is there in India right now. And people all around the world are trying their best to regain these practices. One of the things that I encountered and one of the ideas that enamored me a lot was this practice of permaculture that started in Australia. The beautiful thing about this practice is that you reclaim forest land
Mm-hmm.
from agricultural land. You plant trees and supporting plants that naturally support each other, and the nutrient cycles that are normally very natural to a land but are compensated in industrial agriculture practices with artificially produced nutrients are functioning like a regenerative cycle in this practice, which is amazing. Why is it amazing? I mean,
because it sounds like out of this world, but that's the plot twist, to be honest, because the first time we ever talked about permaculture, I really thought, wow, this sounds like too good to be true. The problem is it is what has been before then got changed by the industrial or the industrialization of agriculture. And now just thinking about, wow, imagine just putting a seed in the soil and watering it and waiting for a crop to come up out of the soil. This is what's mind-blowing right now. And yeah, it's just crazy how history turned this way around.
Not only that, but even when we were thinking that planting a seed was that easy, it wasn't.
That's true. That's true. It has much more behind it than just putting a seed in soil. And that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, it's riddled with genetically modified seeds, hybrid varieties, and not only that, hybridized varieties are something new. We humans have been hybridizing plants for ages to, customize the produce or the fruit or a vegetable to their own liking or to their own taste or color. So it's very interesting how when you get into it, even harvesting seeds, saving seeds, and conditioning them to give you a certain kind of crop is a whole other business.
And that's another debate as well, because there is the argument, and I bet some of our listeners would have this argument on mind, that this is how the future is. This is how we close the gap between the food we have and the food we should have to cover the world hunger. And this is basically the technology of agriculture, if we make an analogy in this sense.
It is. When I was reading about seeds, there is a huge focus on because it's an industrial form of agriculture where there is an external input of nutrients, and the fertilizers are again another set of chemicals, and there are pesticides which are another set of chemicals, just to facilitate a certain variety of cropping system, which is a monocropping system. People have developed seed varieties by genetically modifying them to be drought resistant or flood resistant, or resistant to a certain bacteria or a certain pest. In which case there is a compromise.
Yeah.
And this compromise is seen in the way the food nutrition is concerned. We are compromising on the quality of the food that we are yielding from this kind of crop. Did you notice that sometimes your parents talk about a certain fruit tasting better in their times?
Yeah, I thought this was just parent talks, but I think I get the bigger picture now. What irritates me personally, to be honest, is rather the loopholes within the whole process. Because through what I've read, and again we're stressing on the fact that we are no experts by any means, but from what I have read recently, preparing for the blogs, getting involved in the Mitti Collective, I just couldn't fail to see how people try to find legal loopholes and, capitalize on the fact of seed modifications and genetically modifying crops and animals. And it just kind of made me angry because, for example, if we take the European Union as an example, it is legally forbidden to patent seeds. Nevertheless, there are multiple cases that have been documented by NGOs and by associations against patents on seeds and living organisms. And these patents are just living proof of the system we live in, the system that tries to capitalize on things no matter what,
Yeah, I mean, industries have been trying to find loopholes to patent seeds because they use it as an excuse to standardize or regulate food quality. Somewhere it feels like a fake argument, regulation again is some kind of fake argument about how to make people fear that what they are doing is wrong and this standardized form of seed is better for them. So this is again a whole another political conversation which involves seed activism, and there are already activists who are discussing about that. But we as the collective have never been about these politics.
And we don't intend to be. Just a random disclaimer But since we touched on it in the blog, maybe we can talk about what we have written in the blog so far, because it has been a really exciting journey for us to write about diverse articles, and one of which was actually seeds and seed saving, seed modification, one of which was also the industrialization of agriculture, alternative living. Am I missing something, Anurag? What did we write?
We also wrote about, how do you say this? The fears of adopting an alternative lifestyle. We also interviewed an already established project who is introducing regenerative farming method to a farmer community in India. And we also happened to have a conversation with a close friend who has already worked with communities and has shared her experience with what involves community work. One of the things that really I appreciate listening from her was that she mentioned that communities are not beneficiaries, which is often the case with non-government organization work. And this is not the case. She has been telling us that they are temples of knowledge. The rural community is a temple of knowledge, and that we should consider them as collaborators and not as beneficiaries. And this is what we as the Mitti Collective want to adapt to in our mission as well.
Exploring the temples of knowledge in villages.
Oh my God. I mean... to a certain extent, a lot of you listeners might be thinking that we are sounding like hippies.
We are. To a certain extent, we are.
But, getting that sort of label is a part of the professional hazard in what we're trying to do. But we are trying and doing our best to understand and realize as much as we can what this traditional knowledge really means to us as humans, because we as humans have separated ourselves from humanity itself. We have lost touch with the environment around us. We have distanced ourselves from it. We have an imagination that is growing beyond what the framework of nature works on, and somehow a lot of these traditional practices are part of this framework, and this is our mission to realize that again and come back to.
And I think our journey was kind of a reflex action to what we have been exposed to, because as we mentioned before, in the Mitti Collective we are mostly engineers, so the exposure to technology that we have been experiencing has been quite a lot. So we are not coming from countryside communities directly, or we have been living in nature and listening to the beautiful sounds. This is what we kind of aspire to, but not necessarily where we come from. Nevertheless, we felt the urge to, especially also taking into consideration the coronavirus outbreak and the lockdowns and how things looked as if it's the end of everything as we know it. And this all made us even further think about how we lead our lives and where do we really want to go from now till the future.
That sounds amazing. Because, I did realize that during this COVID-19 lockdown, a lot of people were going through a severe depression, sense of loneliness, and a sense of no purpose. Just because they realize that they cannot live by themselves. There must be something to this,
And it is a big problem to some, for sure. This is out of question. But I think the rhythm that we have been leading life in general is kind of a little bit too fast, maybe. So that when things slowed down, many of us felt that this is uncomfortable to them. So yeah, it made us think maybe we need at least a slow day once a week, for example.
I mean, to a lot of people, slowing down means not being productive or being lazy. But slowing down means, to me, slowing down has meant to get in sync with the cycles of nature again, to get back to where my imagination lies. And that's how the energy flows, that's how we can be creative, we can re-strategize where we are and find a sense of purpose again. And the Mitti Collective is an outlet for us to find that balance back.
Speaking of strategy, we actually have in our pipeline a lot of ideas for both the blog and the podcast.
Yes.
How about we touch on that? So, would you like to talk about that for some time?
So, until now, we have been writing very emotional blogs about living an alternative lifestyle and introducing this kind of regenerative practices in field of agriculture. But the Mitti Podcast is also an outlet for discussing the culture that surrounds agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
For example, something that really, really enamors me about the culture around agriculture is the cooking of the food, the processing of the new produce, the new crop, dehusking pulses, making of wicker baskets from bamboo, making bags from jute, clay pots that we cook in, and a lot of handmade and hand-woven crafts that surround agriculture.
Yeah.
These are some of the very beautiful things that are produced organically from the land, and this also helps in putting resources that we yield from crops into good use.
Upcycling.
Mm-hmm. Something that is so-called a new generation word, but has always existed again.
That's true. And for me, I think I'm most fascinated by the relations within a rural community, because somehow everyone knows everyone. They don't have Facebook, they don't have Instagram, they don't have anything, but they are nevertheless, in my opinion, more connected than any urban setting that we ever experience in the world.
All these trades always engaged rural communities in a certain way, and they traded in these engagements.
Yeah.
Like somebody produced cotton and somebody wove the thread,
mm-hmm.
and somebody made the cloth out of this thread and then traded in this cloth outside. So there was a whole supply chain connected to this, and that it takes me back to the whole idea of supply chain again, and that also takes me back to the whole cycle of energy life cycle, which is I think what I'm going to deal with in the next blog, where I intend to discuss the energy life cycle of traditional farming practice and what kind of energy life cycle an industrial agriculture practice follows, and comparing them,
mm-hmm.
and trying to find the gap between the two.
So yeah, a lot of ideas for you guys in our pocket, and maybe a couple of more technical blogs, showcasing the engineers in in us. So bear with us a little bit on the technical side. And for the podcast, there is room for so many more topics and flexibility. We would love to listen from you as well. What would you like us to discuss and think together about in this podcast?
We would also be inviting some very interesting people on this podcast who would discuss about social entrepreneurship, about writing proposals,
coming or living in a village,
of course. How intervention into rural communities can sometimes backfire.
That's true.
And so many other topics. But it takes time, so bear with us, and
reach out for us, guys. Let us know what you would like to listen to, what you would like even to read on the blog. How do you think of the blog so far? How do you think of this podcast? Please be kind. This is our very, very first episode. It has been very exciting for us. And thank you all very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please rate this episode, subscribe to our blog, subscribe to this podcast, and keep up with the next episodes and blog entries. And see you next time.
See you next time, guys.